Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on understanding bounces. My name is Jill, and presenting today is Kirsty Esparza. She is our delivery director, and she's going to take you through understanding what a bounce is, how we process it, and what you can do yourself. Just a couple things before we get started. This is one of our shorter webinars, so it's going to be about 20 to 25 minutes. And then at the end, we will do Q&A. So if you think of some questions along the way, go ahead and type those into the box that you see in your GoToWebinar window, and we'll be happy to answer as many of those as we can at the end of the webinar. To answer the question that's probably in a lot of your minds right now, is this being recorded? The answer is yes, we are recording this, so you'll be able to access this information again on our help site next week. So if you go to help.verticalresponse.com and click on the webinars tab, you can find our recorded webinars there, and I will put this and our slide deck up there next week. So with that, let's go ahead and get started.
Thank you, Jill. So usually the first question I like to answer is exactly what is a bounce? So I like to think of a bounce as a return to sender. The email gets sent off okay, but for some reason it can't get through to the recipient address. In most cases, the receiving email network will return an emailed response indicating why the bounce occurred, and this is called a non-delivery receipt, or NDR. There's actually a few different things to call it. You may be familiar with this from your own personal email experience. Generally, email bounces in your personal accounts will come from a strange name called mailer daemon. And here's a quick example of what one of those bounces might look like in your own email interface. At VR, our infrastructure recognizes when there's a delivery problem because of a bounce based on the content of the bounce message, which has been circled in blue, and we'll discuss in more detail a little bit later on. And then we process that returned email appropriately. So from a high level, there are two main categories of bounces, permanent and temporary. Permanent bounce is generally called hard, and a temporary bounce is generally called soft. Permanent bounces indicate the email address cannot be delivered and most likely will not be able to be delivered in the future, thus hard. A temporary bounce, soft bounce, they're handled in a variety of ways by our email system, depending on the nature of the problem, the response received, and these remain mailable moving forward, but we'll talk about those as well. So looking specifically at permanent bounces, these are generally caused by two main reasons. The email address doesn't exist, or the domain doesn't exist. So when we are, and non-existent email addresses are inevitable. For example, people change jobs, their old email address then gets deleted, addresses in your list go bad over time. A certain level of hard bounces is to be expected. Industry statistics, there was a Juniper report in 2009, showed that up to 33% or a third of email addresses become invalid every year. So receiving the user unknown error indicates that that address is no longer active or has never been an active email address, and so there's no possible future delivery. Because of the high attrition rate of email, that 33% that can go invalid every year, I recommend sending to your subscribers on a very regular basis. Really monthly would be a good minimum frequency, and this would decrease the possibility of a sudden spike on specific campaigns. If you're mailing to an older subscriber list, and I don't recommend mailing to a subscriber list that's over a year old that hasn't been contacted, we do recommend breaking up older lists to mail over several days or several campaigns to avoid a sudden increase in bounces as well. The invalid address user unknown error could also be the result of poor data capture methods. At VR, we recommend requiring subscribers maybe to enter their email address twice or use the double opt-in process associated with our opt-in forms to ensure that your recipients have given you the right information. In my experience, opt-in specifically captured on paper and then entered into the database can often have typos and misspellings.
No one can read my handwriting either, so trying to decipher what I've written down is pretty hard too.
Exactly. And that's one thing that we see a lot with people uploading small lists. Are syntactical errors,
Mhm.
people leaving out the dot in the .com. Sometimes there'll be no @ address. Sometimes people forget the second O in yahoo.com. So if you're uploading, a list that's of reasonable size and it's a new list to your VR account, I definitely recommend eyeballing it for common syntax errors that you can manually fix yourself. And then sending to unknown or non-existent domains can also indicate poor data capture measures, old data, questionable data sources. Specifically, sending to older lists can increase the likelihood of mailing to these dead domains, and a domain, just to back up, is the portion after the @ sign. Domains become invalid all the time when
Mhm.
companies are acquired and their domain name changes or businesses go out of business. And so it's not uncommon to see one domain in your database suddenly start rejecting all email. So let's move on to temporary bounces, and these are by far the more common types of bounces, and they can occur for a much more interesting variety of reasons. Because most temporary bounces are the result of temporary issues, at VR we reattempt delivery for emails that have received a temporary bounce for up to 72 hours. And a vast majority, I'd say 90+% of mail that receives a soft bounce the first time gets delivered within that window. And then if an email does continue to be soft bounced for the full 72 hours outside of that window, the address will still remain mailable in your account because the response we're receiving is that the issue is temporary and will likely be resolved. Right now, we don't have reporting available in the application to illustrate which portion of your contacts may have soft bounced. However, I can assure you that those addresses do remain mailable and active in your contact list so that you can reattempt delivery in future campaigns. So some common temporary bounce reasons include inactive accounts or mailbox full. So inactive accounts indicate that the mailbox is unavailable, temporarily disabled for some reason, maybe infrequent use. Maybe they've gone from a Yahoo address to a Hotmail address, or there could be problems with their account. Sometimes Aunt Lucy's email might have been taken over by a spam bot, and Hotmail shut her account down until they could resolve the problem. So there's all sorts of temporary reasons that an address could come back with an inactive account bounce. Mailbox full, it obvious recipient's mailbox is full or exceeded storage. This could be caused by infrequent use of the mailbox, a temporary change in email checking habits, say they're on vacation,
Going
or
around the world.
exactly, or again they've had an address change and have just moved on to somewhere else. Another really common reason for technical or for temporary bounces are technical failures, including errors like connection timeouts or resources unavailable or out of memory. And these are all typically indicative of a problem with the mail server on the receiving end that we don't have any control over. And these will generally resolve over time if the domain is an active and valid domain. So, and these technical kinds of temporary situations are often resolved within that 72-hour window. So we don't usually see a lot of soft bounces come through after that 72-hour window for true technical failures. And then the last kind of temporary bounce we monitor is the block bounce. And this, we consider it a soft bounce because it occurs when an email is rejected or bounced due to filtering issues. So those filtering issues are transient and can change, so we consider this temporary. So a subscriber who receives a block type bounce will be retried. That email will be retried in the next send, or the email address will be remailed to in the next campaign, just to be clear. So what might cause some block bounces? Complaints. If your email is generating too many complaints, that the content itself, the email that you're sending can be blocked. And there are some ISPs like Hotmail and Yahoo that you may be sending to 100 recipients at Yahoo. You've delivered to that 100 recipients, but the first 20 who check complain aggressively. Hotmail will then reach back in to that inbox and move uh, that that email to the bulk folder. So complaints really can impact your mail even after it's been sent. Um, invalid addresses. If you're mailing to too many user unknowns, and this is really seen, and I get into this a little bit later, this is really seen at small domains, B2B domains, where they have a really low threshold for invalid address type bounces, because this can be indicative of a dictionary spam attack. Their servers are going to be their email network's going to be a little bit more strict to protect their smaller business users. So I have seen examples of somebody sending to a small business domain where they were sending 167 emails. 12 emails bounced while they were sending it, and then immediately after that 12th invalid address bounce, suddenly they were hard blocked, and they weren't able to deliver any of the messages to that domain. So it's definitely important to make sure that your database is full of valid and recent subscribers who are engaged with your mailings. Content can also cause mail to receive a block bounce, and we're actually seeing this a little bit more often as I'm seeing filtering change, and we're doing some research on the changing filter environment and plan on pushing more information about that later.
Is
But
that like a general change, or is that due specifically to this time of year when email mailing tends to go up?
good question. And normally we do see email filtering tighten around this time of year,
Right.
so that's a great question. However, some of the changes I'm seeing are general.
Okay.
And so we're definitely going to distribute more information about that. But content is being reviewed more carefully by receiving ISPs, especially the top four, because they have just more sophisticated filtering systems. So what they're beginning to do is fingerprint content, and so I'm going to pause really briefly and try to explain what that is. So fingerprinting is taking looking at the content and taking a picture of it within their computer system, and then generalizing some of the features. And so that, for example, I'm looking at Jill, and I can generalize her as a woman with blonde hair, and she's wearing glasses and jeans. Sorry if I just exposed
I think they knew most of that.
Okay.
My picture's on the intro slide.
So those general characteristics, one of those or all of them might be a flag in my filtering system that there's a problem. Maybe, if I'm looking at a fingerprint and I recognize that fingerprints indicating the person has glasses on are a consistent problem, then that may be a trigger to block the mail for content reasons. And then URL blocks. Every link and email address within the body of your email contains its own reputation. So if you are finding your contents being less engaged or is being blocked, maybe there's an address, a partner, a link, an advertiser, something within there unrelated to you that might be causing problems as well.
And we usually try to address this if you've been to any of our other webinars where we talk about creating good emails. We always tell you to add links in your email, but you want to know the reputation of the links that you're adding. If it's not going to your website, it can definitely cause delivery issues.
Right. So I just want to touch very briefly on the theory of bounce reply codes. And so how can VR tell if it's a permanent or temporary bounce? There are standards for how bounce responses should be formatted. Specifically, the standard involves numerical coding, and so I pulled up my example real quick to show you, what a bounce message might look like. The part I circled below, you can see there's some language and some coding, that 554 delivery error. Well, that 554 tells us that it's a hard bounce, that it's a permanent bounce. Permanent bounces are generally delivered with a 500 series code, and soft bounces with that 400 series code. However, it's never black and white. Sometimes the email network can have aggressive bounce messaging, or a postmaster or IT department managing that it wants to aggressively block commercial mailers. So our bounce processing system has been built to recognize specific bounces that may come across with a hard bounce code as temporary bounces. And these bounce responses do change over time. AOL will suddenly update all of their bounces, or Comcast, or Acme.com is using a new filter, and so their bounce messages suddenly may change. So we audit and monitor our bounce processing regularly to make sure that our rules and how we're processing mail is up to date, and that we're processing everything as accurately as possible. And so, how shall you, as a VR user, arm yourself so that you can troubleshoot and recognize when there are problems that can be seen in the bounce reporting? So, we do have bounce reporting available in the application. You will want to navigate to the sent email section and review the available reporting there. So, you can either click the email name button and then click through the report tab, or you can go ahead and hover over the action button and then choose to view reports. So once you're there on the reports tab, I recommend that you review the domain reporting. I think this is the most interesting of all the reports there.
I like it too.
This is where you'll be able to see if the issues with bouncing are widespread. Is it only your cousin Laura email address at at SBC Global that's bouncing, or is it all of SBC Global? So you'll be able to see, is this specific? Is it widespread? This reporting will highlight bounces when the rate of the bounce reaches a certain threshold, which is why you see varying shades of red. Darker red at the 5% and above, brighter red as the threshold climbs above 10%. And we really want to enable you guys to be in control of your data and really understand it, and which is why we add this highlighting to indicate when there might be a problem that you want to look into. Studies have shown that opt-in lists generate bounces below 5% on average. So if your bounce rates are above 5% in general, then there could be a problem maybe with the age of the list, maybe your opt-in process isn't providing enough notice that people will be receiving email marketing. So these are all things to think about if you're seeing bounces or problems with age, or maybe you need to add that extra double opt-in step, or have the subscribers enter their address the second time, something to make sure that you're avoiding any syntactical errors and then capturing valid email addresses. So as you continue to troubleshoot, one thing I recommend is looking for patterns in bounce issues. Like I said, are all the addresses at one domain bouncing? Are they all bouncing for one campaign, but then delivering successfully in previous? Something may have changed within the content. Perhaps you have a new partner. Maybe there's something else going on where their content or what they may have added to your content might be causing problems. If you're seeing block rates near 100%, then there's likely a bigger issue at hand, like this content blocking I just talked about. And our support team can work with you to identify what issues within the content might be causing that mail to be blocked. So if you're seeing issues with one mailing versus others, that's helpful to us, because then we can dive in and pinpoint what the problem might be. Now, I will step back and say in most cases, a lot of this content blocking is most likely tracked as a soft bounce, because it is considered very temporary. So I suggest, in order to keep an eye out for this, monitor engagement statistics for dramatic shifts as well, because if suddenly your open rate plummets, that can indicate that maybe there's a soft block or a bulking issue happening due to filtering that our support team can help troubleshoot you through. So what happens? One more thing. What happens if we have if you see false positive bounces? You know for sure that that recipient's email address is valid, but the system keeps reporting it as bounced. This would be a great time to call support. We can review the exact bounce response in our internal reporting and can either share the permanent response with you or work to address a delivery issue. So what are some common problems common things that can cause problems with delivery, that can cause bounces? Some universal triggers across the board at B2B and B2C, Hotmail, small business domains. I mentioned it earlier, invalid addresses. If you have a high rate of non-valid addresses, the campaign or the email can get blocked mid-send. A lack of permission, which can generally then show up in a high rate of complaints. If you're hitting spam traps, and what spam traps are email addresses that are known to have not signed up for any email marketing. Sometimes there's two general kinds of spam traps. One's a honeypot spam trap. Those are spam traps that were created and never used as live email addresses. These are the most dangerous kinds of spam traps to hit. The other kind are old and expired email addresses. You haven't used your Hotmail address in 60 days. It could be rolled over, and in after a year or so of returning a bounce, That email address will no longer return a bounce and start accepting mail again just to see who may be continuing to mail to it. Those kinds of spam traps are a little bit less impactful. They just lend to our reputation as a sender and don't generally cause blocks. It's the honeypots that are the problem. And then, is your content not engaging to your subscribers? One thing that's a common problem in email marketing is your subscribers using a lazy way to unsubscribe by clicking junk or spam when they're just tired of your content. It's a huge frustration, and for you as marketers and for us as an ESP, even the ISPs are frustrated with that situation because they know most people want to get your email, and then those people who are being lazy and just complaining about it to get off the list are going to then harm your delivery and cause bigger problems. So I'd encourage you, know your subscribers. Make sure that your content is engaging. If you can segment and target by, you know, speciality or region or gender, do that so that the content is as specific to the recipient as possible. If if you've been contacted by perhaps the vertical response compliance team about ongoing complaint rate problems, one thing you may want to do is add a message to the pre-header section of the email. That's the very top right above where your content begins, and remind people where they subscribed and that if they're no longer engaged, they can unsubscribe via the link in the footer of the email. So sometimes just reminding people that they're valid subscribers
Mhm.
is enough to trigger their memory. And if you have the location, say you subscribed at, you know, Mallory's gallery, that would be perfect. Or, through this particular website link, that's ideal because then that's going to trigger a specific memory.
Right.
So looking at getting a little bit more specific, looking at the big four ISPs, Yahoo, Gmail, Hotmail, and AOL, which do make up the bulk of people's databases, especially if you're marketing to B and C,
B2C.
B2C, thank you, consumers. Um, what they're looking for is engagement, engagement, engagement. And right now, that is the buzzword that they're pushing. Hotmail recently put out a blog post about some changes that they're doing to their filtering when it comes to commercial mailing. But really, what it comes down to is, are those recipients engaged? Are they opening the email? Are they clicking the email? Hotmail, Yahoo, they're all reviewing how long your recipient is spending looking at your email. Are they forwarding it to their friends? Are they putting it in a special folder? So these are all things that the big four ISPs with the more sophisticated systems are looking at. So you really want to target your most engaged recipients. And if you're seeing problems with engagement, what you may want to do is create a segment targeting your most engaged contacts, and target them specifically for a few campaigns. You might want to create a segment of your non-engaged recipients and target them with some specific messaging to try to bring them back into the active and engaged side of your recipient list. Um, and by targeting and marketing to your more engaged recipients, you will be building a better email sending reputation because they're going to be active and engaged and wanting and opening your email. So that's only going to make you as a sender look better to the receiving email networks. And then you can pepper it here and there with less frequent sends to your more broad database, including those non-responding segments.
And you can use the segmentation tool in your VR account to create these types of segments that Kirsty's talking about. Once you've sent out an email, the segmentation tool gives you the opportunity to create a list based on the responses to your email or emails. You can set it up over a length of time as well. So if you wanted to create a list of engaged recipients, you could include the people who are opening and clicking your emails. You can create a list of the non-responders to see if maybe you can pull them in with different messaging in your subject line or pre-header or content, and see if you can get more of them to be engaged. So using the segmentation tool, it's under the list section, can help you do this really easily.
Thank you. Perfect. So then the other common umbrella I wanted to talk about were small business domains. And again, I bring up content here and the links and email addresses because the email filters used at the smaller business domains are really looking at the links and the email addresses. They're scanning the content. They're becoming sophisticated as well in the same ways that the Yahoos and Gmails are, in order to isolate problem content. So that way, for example, they're not penalizing all vertical response senders because we send all of you as vertical response customers send from the same email network. And so what the ISPs were seeing is when they ran into issues with mail from ESPs like vertical response, they would have a hard time blocking us because so many other of their customers would get upset if they weren't getting their newsletters or their transactional messaging coming from vertical response as well. So that's why the big four and then the filtering companies used by some of the smaller business domains are really getting much better at targeting content instead of just the broad sending entity, because they know that a lot of your recipients want to receive your mail, and that if there's one poisoned drop of ink in the well of good senders, to use a strange metaphor, that can anger, the other Yahoo recipients who are missing your mail. So from a high level, that's what we're seeing from the content filtering changes. Also, multiple messages of the same content can cause problems at small business domains because their filters can perceive this as a run or a spam attack, even if you're targeting an engaged audience. And so if we're seeing business to business delivery problems, our delivery team does reach out to the postmasters and IT groups at small businesses to resolve issues on a one-off basis. So if you're seeing that, we can work on whitelisting or getting that email network to approve all mail coming from vertical response, so that way you don't run into these kinds of issues. And then I just like to, as we kind of wrap this up slowly, I like to just talk about some common questions that come up. VR used to process all bounces as hard bounces until about almost 2 years ago. And at that point, we undertook a big initiative and reviewed thousands and thousands of bounces to set up the most intelligent bounce processing that we could. We audit, as I said earlier, we audit these rules associated with the bounce processing regularly to make sure they remain efficient, so that those temporary bounces that in the past were just gone forever, they remain active contacts in your database. With those changes to our bounce processing, we do now have the ability internally to review bounce responses. So if you are troubleshooting a concern that you're seeing in your domain reporting, we can definitely look into that more deeply with you. We are working on developing reporting for the application so that you can troubleshoot this end yourself. But I don't have a specific ETA. I wish I did. I know that's probably one of the questions sitting in the bucket on when that product release will happen, but I can say it's being worked on and looked at, but I just don't have a time. And then we do always get questions from our Salesforce users who use the vertical response integration into Salesforce, and I can assure you that the bounce status for your contacts is updated in the Salesforce contact page when you update your records. And then finally, I'm just tossing this in because we do get questions. What does the unsubscribe status mean? How does this happen? So the obvious question is it doesn't happen because of a bounce, but I do think it's worth noting. Mm-hmm. They unsubscribe in the following ways. They click the unsubscribe link or reply indicating they want to be unsubscribed. So that's relatively obvious. The subscriber if your subscriber does report the email as spam to an ISP like Hotmail, Yahoo, Comcast, Roadrunner, they have partnerships called feedback loops, and these ISPs will then return the information about who complained to us, and then we will unsubscribe that address from your database. And then the third and final way that the unsubscribe status can happen to one of your contacts is that if you manually change it to unsubscribe. So that's how those three things can happen. So
here's some resources. Perfect. So we're going to start taking questions now. So if you have some questions, go ahead and type those in there. And I'm going to leave this resources slide up here if you want to jot anything down. We have lots of information on a variety of topics, including bounces, at our blog. So if you go to blog.verticalresponse.com, we actually blog usually at least 3 times a week. And it's all kinds of information, email marketing and various other things. The lounge, which you can access through your vertical response account by clicking on Community in the blue navigation tab. The lounge is made up of people using VR, and you can post questions in there and the other users will answer. It's a forum. So if you have delivery questions, you can go in there and ask questions about that or bounces, and there's lots of knowledgeable people in there.
And then if there's a question that our users can't answer in the lounge,
We'll answer.
sometimes we'll hop in and help out there.
We also have free guides available, and there's tons of free guides, but we do have some specific to bounces and delivery. This is the URL here, but if you just go to our website, verticalresponse.com, and click on the tab that says resources, you'll see where it says free marketing guides. And the ones that I can recommend, the one that specifically addresses bounces is called Boing, Everything You Ever Wanted to Know About Why Emails Bounce. We also have a guide on email authentication, which is how emails get delivered to the inbox, basically. So if you have an interest in that, we have a guide. And then there's also a guide called Vertical Response Email Delivery and You, a handy guide, which goes over some information about bounces and obviously some other things as well involved in delivering emails.